Hello and welcome to our fifth author chat. I am Audrey Glenn and this is Diana Davis, and we're so excited to talk today about Integrity's Choice, which is our fifth chat and the fifth book of the series, featuring Constance Hayes, the third Hayes sister, and Fischer Marks, the patriotic printer. So tell us a little bit about Constance and Fischer.
So Constance, like you said, she is the middlest child. That's what I call my third out of my five kids, the middlest child. She is very much a peacemaker. Her personality really evolved for us over the course of the series. By the time we got to the third and fourth and fifth books, we were like, oh, okay, this is not the person that we thought when we initially wrote the first book. And she is also she's a very creative person, and she writes stories and plays from the beginning, and poetry. We get to see her poetry in book 4, and Patience does not think it's very good. But she's very imaginative and flighty, and very much off in her own world a lot of the time. But very creative, very kind, very accommodating, does not like conflict, and very much spends most of the book stuffing down the anger that she rightfully holds toward Fischer Marks.
And she's really beloved by her sisters and her whole family, but of all of the sisters, I think they really all have a special place in their heart for Constance. Yes. Because she is such a kind and gentle person.
Mm-hmm. She's just the sweetest, and I think too that she's kind of misunderstood because she avoids conflict so much. She, then she can't really stand up for herself. She can't challenge other people's assumptions about her. One of my favorite moments of Constance before this book is in book 4, when there's a horrible bloody accident in the family. She is the one who can pull it together, and even though we know that she's extremely squeamish, has a very weak stomach, established from book 2 on, she is the one that's able to hold it together, and she runs to go get help, and she directs Fischer what he needs to do. Mm-hmm. So she really comes in handy in a stressful situation.
She's definitely underestimated in that constantly, and that kind of changes by the end of this book. So that's really, really cool to see that her family kind of has to acknowledge that there's more to her than even they knew. I mean, they love her a lot, but
even the parents who don't figure a lot into the stories and conflicts in the previous books. Josiah's interactions with Constance in this story change him too, and I really like that way that arc plays out. So as far as Fischer goes, Fischer, we know him as a raging patriot from book 4. We also know him as a potential suitor for Patience, Constance's older sister. And if you are reading between the lines in book 4, you can also see that Fischer admits that he's actually in love with someone else. But he doesn't believe that they can be together.
I love the speech he gives Patience, which is like so world weary. He's very young, but he's like, oh, love is nothing, blah, blah, blah. He's come to this conclusion.
It's not a good basis for marriage. And as we mentioned in the chat for book 4, that was actually a pretty common view at the time. And we all know people who married for love, but it didn't last, and sometimes it doesn't. It is something that you have to work at, and so we love seeing our couples continue to work at their love throughout the stories. But Fischer did not believe in marrying for love, and in this book we get to discover a little more about why that is. He believed that his sister married for love, and her marriage ended up very badly. His parents married for love, but then his mother became depressed, as we would know today. It's not a concept that they had at the time. They just have melancholy, and eventually died. And so he doesn't believe that love is a good basis for marriage. So he actually believes that he should not marry for love because it is dangerous. And he falls so deeply in love with Constance off the screen during the events of book 4 that he believes that it's a dangerous, even a physical danger to her, and he could only hurt her. So he he breaks things off with her, and all of this happens off screen. We had to work and coordinate very carefully our timelines for these books, because we talked about, in our original plan for the books, we knew that Constance was going to end up with a printer. And here's a little Easter egg for you. Fischer Marks is actually named after a shoe brand. That is Mark Fischer. I was shopping for sandals on Amazon, and I saw Mark Fischer sandals, and I was like, that's it. Flip it around. And now it's Fischer Marks. Then Audrey said in book 4 that she wanted to have a love triangle with the characters, and she wanted to use Fischer, and I was like, okay.
I know, here you go. Here's a problem. Like, good luck.
I know. So we kind of do this to one another sometimes, but and then I thought, what if? Because I really didn't want it to seem like he was, settling for Amy March, or like Lori going after the youngest sister just so he could be in the family, or
fickle, that he just,
so
or that he was getting hurtful. Like he wasn't trying to toy with anybody's affections. He had his understanding of what he thought was right, and he was trying to do that.
And I didn't want her to feel like a second choice for him. So I was like, what if, as Audrey was writing book 4, I was like, what if secretly they have been carrying on like a correspondence, prelude to a courtship, and then he breaks things off and decides to go after Patience.
And I think that's such a fun thing. If you read book 4, then you kind of, like we said, you get some of these hints about something between Fischer and Constance. But if you read book 5, you actually get to go in and fill in the blanks, and you get to find out. So you got to do some really cool stuff with flashbacks. And so you get to find out stuff that was going on during the actual events of book 4 between Fischer and Constance. And I think it's just kind of cool, like almost like uncovering a mystery, because you're finally getting to see
how the pieces all fit together. And I think a lot of readers have picked up on the fact that Fischer is obviously in love with Constance in book 4. Like every time he sees Patience wearing something that is the sisters share clothes, so wearing something that Constance has worn in the past, he's like, oh, you're wearing your sister's dress. How's your sister doing? Okay, I met Constance. How is she doing?
And I think it's something probably the reader picks up on before Patience, because it takes her a very long time to realize that this is going on, to the point even where she inadvertently causes pain to Constance and feels terrible about that, because it wasn't in her intent to do that. But the reader, if the close reader, will understand that there's more to the eye.
In book 4. So, and then in book 5, Patience actually goes with Gilbert when he goes to Delaware. As we mentioned, that Delaware was actually part of Pennsylvania at the time. It's 3 counties on that side of the Delaware River, and it is during this time period that they declare independence from Pennsylvania. So he goes back to Delaware, and Patience goes with him. So she is not there during a lot of about half of the book. So she also misses the things that happen between Constance and Fischer. And so at the end, in the conclusion of the book, she's just kind of surprised to find out all this is happening.
Although she's fine with it. Like, to be clear, she's not jealous at all. Like, she's like, great, like, I'm glad you're all happy. She doesn't feel like, unlike where Fischer may have been irritated with Gilbert, like just thinking he's lesser than Constance. I mean, I think Patience just wants her family to be happy and wants Constance to be happy and well taken care of by somebody who loves her. So she's not upset.
Yeah, no, just surprised. Because she didn't see this coming, and she had a whole year and she didn't. So that brings brings out the fact that this book takes place a year after book 4, and during that time, Constance has been hurting the whole time, not only of the way Fischer abruptly broke things off with no explanation, so she has no closure, but then also he courted her sister, which is pretty low. It is. And so it took a lot of work to make Fischer make sense, and to try to redeem Fischer a little bit, because what he did is really low and really hurtful. And so Constance has every right to be hurt, but like I said, she shoves that anger down and won't admit it, so then they can't work through that.
Yeah. And one thing I love is just getting to see Verity kind of become more of a not just the little sister, but she starts to become more important and plays a role in this, because the other sisters, they're married and they've moved on. So we've narrowed down the Hayes household, and we now just have Constance and Verity and Mercy around, and they all play kind of an important role in each other's lives, obviously. And so, so Fischer is just in this very unenviable position of having broken Constance's heart. He really loves Constance. He thinks they can't be together, and he's miserable, she's miserable. And so that was really the challenge of just how can we get them back together so everyone can be happy.
Yeah, and that's also part of the reasons why I had to include those flashbacks, so you could see just how, like, of all the relationships, their love is just so pure, like, and just beautiful, and they're just so happy and enthralled with one another in the initial stages of their first relationship. And so we have to have those flashbacks so that we know that this is worth it, that what they're going for is worth it, and when they are together, they're going to be very happy. If Fischer can just let himself love her.
And hopefully, like, you know, with some of our other characters, the more that our readers get to know Fischer, they kind of understand where he's coming from and some of the pain that he's experienced. Like you mentioned,
no one is harder on Fischer than Fischer himself.
Yeah,
he's the one that's making his own life hard. And we've talked a little bit about the Enneagram in our previous videos. He is a type 1, and we have actually a lot of ones in the series, and it's just because it's so easy to make them to manipulate them and make them do things that are against their own interests. It's so easy.
And we can be really passionate, like with the patriotism. And you think of a patriot, you know, like somebody who's really
right. Anything that's, you know, this is what's right. I have to do it this way because this is what's right, no matter how much it hurts me. So.
And so part of the issue, you know, we already have established in our previous video and in the book that, you know, Fischer really looked down on Gilbert. But we can talk a little bit about Fischer's sister. And again, this is kind of goes back to why Fischer is really afraid of love. His sister married, he believes, for love, and was abandoned by her husband and really left in a horrible circumstance. Fischer came to Philadelphia to take care of her and to help her, to nurse her back to health. So his sister lives with her, and his sister and Constance are friends. And Fischer, his sister, you know, has a little bit of a, it's not really a relationship, but she really admires Gilbert's older brother, but they can't be together because she's actually still married to her first husband, who's abandoned her, but hasn't divorced her. And so the relationship isn't, there's no expectation on her and that the relationship will proceed further.
And also, divorce was not an option. It had actually been banned by Parliament. They had to be divorces at the time had to be ratified by Parliament. They were passed by an act of the legislature, the Pennsylvania legislature, and then had to be ratified by Parliament. And
which wasn't going to happen.
No, Parliament actually in 1772 or 3 felt that the colonies were being too liberal with divorces and canceled them and wouldn't issue anymore, like no matter what. So,
for quite some time. I mean, really.
It was time before there was legal basis for divorce in the state at that point, the Commonwealth, and even then they were very difficult to obtain. Like even
Fischer,
grounds of abandonment. So
he's really protective of his sister. He's protective of Constance. Like he really wants to be a good person, good brother.
And he thinks he's protecting her from himself.
Yeah, he doesn't think he'd be very, good for Constance. And so Fischer, though, he does have this frustration towards Gilbert's older brother, and that kind of complicates things between the two families. So again, we have this carryover from one book to the next, and kind of seeing these relationships develop over time and the events transpire over time, which is really fun. What is it? So you mentioned a little bit about the flashbacks, but what else? What is at the core of what makes Fischer and Constance a really wonderful match for each other?
So for Fischer, I really see it very clearly for Fischer is that when he is with her, he feels less judgmental toward himself. He feels more at peace and more accepting of himself. And I think that is, for somebody who's really hard on himself like Fischer is, that's really key. And through the course of the novel, like not at the beginning, but through the course of the novel, he really comes to respect Constance's intellect. And that's not something that people have really valued Constance for in her life. Her sweet nature, her kindness. But in the course of Integrity's Choice, they get to see another side of her as she writes this really awesome allegory that I wish was real, and I wish that someone else had written it, because it's really hard. Like, I listened to one of the most famous literary allegories, Animal Farm, to get an idea, and it's kind of like a colonial set Animal Farm, where the animals are the the characters themselves. And so she has a character for David. She even adds a character for Fischer. David's
Kills him.
character and kill. Well, yeah, spoiler, but yeah.
Sorry.
Again,
David's character. I'm repping David today with my stag sweater because David is a stag in the allegory, of course.
Yes,
the most.
And he figures it out. So, but it ends up being Fischer publishes it without realizing who has written it. And later on in the course of the story, when he discovers who it is, he is taken aback, and that really offends Constance because she's like, "Oh, you think I'm stupid?" So
yeah. Again, going back to people really underestimating her. Think, Patience is funny because she doesn't like Constance's poem, and there's also a play that Verity writes. She doesn't think much of that either, which may be more well deserved, but Patience is kind of more analytical and has written off the creative pursuits of her sisters, and nobody suspects that Constance is the authoress of this amazing poem that ends up being very influential on many of the characters. Constance's poem does, and so
it's a story, but yeah, it's prose.
That's a story.
She and in fact, this is set May to July of 1776 with some flashbacks to April, May, June 75. And it's during this time that the Continental Congress is debating whether they want to, the Second Continental Congress still going on, is debating whether they want to declare independence, whether it's time they need to be done and actually declare independence. And it was actually a very close vote in history. The story goes that as the Committee of the Whole, which is not an official binding vote, both South Carolina and Pennsylvania voted against declaring independence, and and New York had to abstain. And they wanted the vote to be unanimous. New York couldn't vote because they had been specifically instructed not to vote for independence and had not received updated instructions yet, which eventually they did. But Pennsylvania and South Carolina were both out, and we talk about this in the book. South Carolina, Edward Rutledge is like, well, if everybody else is going for it, we do need to all hang together, right? And I will vote for it. And the Pennsylvania delegation was split. There were 5 people in the delegation, or actually I think there were more than that, but a number of them there was a lot of turnover in 76 in the Pennsylvania delegation, both before and after this vote. And 2 members of the delegation, John Dickinson and Roger Morris, both, so I think there were 7 actually in the delegation at the time. They had voted against independence, but they saw that it was important, but they felt personally that they could not vote for it. So they abstained from the vote. And 20 years later, one of the members of Congress said that they just didn't show up that day, which is the story that we continue to tell, but it was written 20 years later. So I don't know if that's accurate, but they abstained from the vote, and then they went from 4 against and 3 for independence to 2 against and 3 for independence from the Pennsylvania delegation, which made them 4 independents. And so we've added Josiah and David. We deleted John Morton. Sorry. He died like 8 months later. It's okay. We just moved that up a little. And so we added Josiah on the against side and David obviously on the for side of the independence vote. And initially, when Josiah reads this anonymous pseudonymous pamphlet, Columbia's Fields, he says that this is like incendiary, this is, so biased, you can't trust it. And it's not until much later in the book that Constance confesses to, that really hurts Constance to hear that from her father. And it's not until Constance confesses to her father that she actually wrote it's now a series of pamphlets. She is actually the authoress, and that he takes the time to read it and think through like the arguments that it's making, and that is actually instrumental in changing his mind to vote for independence. And so it, obviously this is all fictional. There are no hazes. David doesn't exist.
Sorry, take however much time you need to process that.
I don't know if life is worth living.
Spoiler alert.
This is fiction.
But what about Fischer makes him a really great match for Constance?
I think he, first of all, Constance, like we said, she doesn't express herself very much. She doesn't want to be involved in conflict. So her patriotism is sometimes more subtle. And so he makes a great foil for her in that he can be very overt in his patriotism, but they both, they feel the same way about this. And it's very important to both of them. And I think Fischer, like Constance needs somebody who can fight for her. And, Fischer we joke sometimes that Fischer's going to fight anybody about almost anything. So.
And one thing about Fischer, though, is that he's so passionate and he's patriot, but especially over the series, we see that like he submits to Constance's opinions and authority and ideas because he willingly wants to do that. Obviously, she is not a super confrontational, angry person, but Fischer loves and respects her so much that he wants to be guided by her influence and her opinions, which is great for Constance, that somebody has seen her for who she is and really respects that.
Mm-hmm. And wants to be guided to her. He is, for someone who is extremely pragmatic, especially as we first meet him in book 4, first get to know him well in book 4, he is like the most romantic, the biggest romantic that we have, I think, in the whole series.
Maybe, besides David.
Of course.
Sorry.
Always, there's always an asterisk.
Caveat,
other than
David is the best, but other than David, absolutely the most romantic of our heroes and what he will do to
and very like the very classic, like he is ready for the 1820s. He's very classic, like I will die for love, and you want a lemonade? Let me go get you one. That does happen in the later book. Like, my wife is dying. I need to get her a lemonade. I know she has hyperemesis. She is actually quite sick, but
yes, he just loves Constance. He adores Constance, and not only just in lip service, but like he truly will do whatever he wants to do to take care of her and cherishes her. So
yes, go to any length. He's then, like you mentioned earlier, he's extremely protective of the people that he cares about. So he very much wants to take care of her and wants to, and I think just that he sees who she is underneath. Eventually, it takes him the whole book, but he eventually sees who she is.
And as things change in the political events and the historical events, as the characters undergo more and more, Fischer really, it's probably a spoiler, but he ends up not throwing himself into the conflict and the fight and putting himself in danger, because that is not what Constance wants. And he puts Constance even above his patriotism, which is the thing that we know him for. He's decided that relationship with Constance is even more important than his personal interests and passions.
Yep. And, obviously Constance wants him there so that, she doesn't want anything to happen to her husband, of course, but she's also, she's having children, and that's extremely physically hard on her. Obviously this is later on, not in this book, but she
very different book.
It's a long book. And
yeah.
And she and as we've mentioned, she was really she needs him also for life, so to live. Although, like we mentioned, there were lots of widows who did take over their husbands' print shops, so she could do that. Constance has a well of strength that other people don't recognize. So,
and she's an Enneagram type 9, which so that's really common with the type 9. They can appear very mild mannered and are often very mild mannered, but can have very deeply held beliefs and be very firm in upholding the things that are very important to them. So,
although they are known for avoiding conflict, so
it really pains her. It really pains Constance to be in conflict with Fischer and her father and anyone else.
Yes.
Even Patience. I mean, really, she never told Patience in book 4, like, hey, by the way, I'm in love with Fischer Marks. Could you stop courting him?
Yeah.
And like you said, she stands up. She really helps Patience. Or she helps when someone's injured, but then later on, when Patience is going through a lot of emotional turmoil and feels like everything's fallen apart, back in book 4, Constance also kind of takes charge there and shows again that strength that she has inside, where she manages to be the person who can, help everybody and help everyone feel better.
Yeah, we mentioned many times that we love the saga nature of our stories, and so it's very hard to talk about our characters in just sticking to the book where they are the narrators and the protagonists, because we love to see them continue to grow after, and interact with us and see all of our favorite moments coming back, and our their iconic lines coming back. So
Fischer has a cottage that's a beautiful little cottage way outside the city. Really not in today's
like totally still basically downtown.
Yeah, right. In today's day and age, it is. Back then, it was beyond comprehension that someone
yeah, out in the country.
And so that's something even before, yeah, Constance just loves this cottage, and even Patience can tell.
It's like, yeah, it's a storybook cottage.
Picturesque.
Yeah.
Covered in vines and flowers and
maybe it's half timbered. I don't know.
Yeah, you really get this sense that Fischer is this storybook hero and dream, and that dream is a little bit shattered when all these events happen, but in the end they're really able to rebuild a really beautiful relationship, and Constance gets to live in the cottage. And so let's see, any interesting research that you did for this book that we haven't mentioned?
Well, I've kind of gone on and on about what was going on at not the Constitutional Convention. I've kind of gone on and on about what was going on at the I've talked a lot already about what went on at the Continental Congress, and a lot of research went into that and figure out like the exact timing of all the dates. Another cool little fact: so Fischer in the book, Fischer is the official printer of the Continental Congress, and there was a real life official printer of the Continental Congress. His name is John Dunlap, and he was actually, he's a real person, obviously, and he was actually in the Philadelphia Light Horse. So,
and you did a lot of cool research about the actual printing process and the machines that they used and the materials. That was really cool to learn about.
Printing is really fun. And in our email list, if you've gotten the bonus features for book 5, you get to see the there's a video from the Ben Franklin printing press. We have been to Philadelphia twice, and it's been closed both times because of COVID, but that we've gone together. But there is a video from the National Park Service showing the printing process. It's really cool. And so I read all these research papers that, label, this is the rounce, this is the devil's tail, this, the different parts of the printing press. And the other fun cultural thing that we highlight in our bonus features is the dancing. Probably more, I don't know, there's a lot of dancing, because dancing was a huge social, that's where you got to socialize, and you had to know all these set form dances, and to be part of even the middle class, really, which was just emerging at the time.
And Fischer's a good dancer. Like, he's impressive. He dresses well too. We'll get to that a little bit too, but his presentation is nice. He's a good dancer, and he's a good dresser, and that's we attribute that to the French side of him. His mother is French, so he has a little bit of fashion inborn, perhaps.
Yes. So, and then there's, at the midpoint of the book, they actually get to go to an assembly. They had a Philadelphia assembly. It was probably actually not meeting in 1776 with all the things that were going on, but it did meet earlier in the 1770s and later. I haven't found any evidence that they were meeting in 76, but I made them meet anyway. And he gets to go. David has an extra ticket for him because David, okay, back to the one that we really love. David very much knows what's going on. Like, I don't even know how, actually, but he knows that that Fischer actually is in love with Constance. He knows Constance loves him back. He is the one. He knows without direct knowledge that Constance wrote the story that's published under a pseudonym. And so he gives Fischer an extra ticket to the assembly because he's a subscriber, and he has an extra ticket. He gives it to Fischer and makes sure that Constance comes. Like, he's very much a matchmaker throughout the series. It's a little more overt in like books 5 and 6.
Yeah, we love that.
Yes.
5 and 6 and
he doesn't want it going on in 7.
Doesn't really want it going on in 8. Reluctant matchmaker at the end. He is.
Yeah,
He
at the
gets
very
that
end.
final push. He gets that
but
role,
he's very much against it in 2 and 7. He's like the anti-matchmaker.
I know we keep saying this, but David, like, we just love seeing the characters grow over time. So we see him in his first book. He's, very impressive, but he doesn't have this confidence
ignorant of politics. He, doesn't know anything about the colonies.
Doesn't know anybody. He's totally adrift, and he's created this amazing life that is not just impressive for his wealth and his position, but just how many people really look up to him. And at the very beginning of this book, I love it. Constance needs some money, and she doesn't want to tell her father what it's for, so he just kind of puts her off. And
it's for a copy of Common Sense, because she's worn like 2 or 3.
And her father, who doesn't approve of patriotism, she can't tell him, but she wants a patriotic pamphlet. And nobody would believe that, Constance, she's just so sweet, is a raving patriot. So David is like, you want some money? Like, have a bag of money, and he fishes out a purse, and it's such a David
the other iconic thing is he just gave one to Owen, because he and Owen are basically in business together, or he's kind of helping to fundraise for Owen's, prototypical legal aid. Owen is running, and so he has a matching purse to his waistcoat. I believe he's wearing like a maroon coat and a cream waistcoat, and he has a matching embroidered purse to his waistcoat. He gives it to Owen, and then Constance needs money. He's like, here, here's another. Here's a second purse.
Yeah, have another purse, and he just whips it out, and here's a bunch of money. I think this kind of goes along with what we've been talking about, which is, so we've got we've explored different types of patriots, and Fischer is like the most patriotic patriot that it gets to in our series, and our next book,
without an asterisk, even more than David. Like,
yeah, and none of the heroes on now are really patriots at all, actually. None of them are. I'll just go out and say it. None of them are patriots. So Fischer is like the pentultimate, the ultimate. No, he's the ultimate patriot under David. Pentultimate compared to David.
I don't know. I think actually Fischer is like even more extreme than David, I think, because Fischer's like, Fischer's
burn it all down for.
So
true. Okay, true. Except, David. Yes. So Fischer is a big patriot. And so talk about Fischer's iconic look that you brought up in conjunction with his patriotism and David's opinion about.
So this is actually in the epilogue of book 4, but because the books are so closely intertwined, no, it's not in the epilogue of book 4. It's the epilogue of book 3, I think.
When we first meet him, right?
So okay, let's talk about this. So I want to talk about how long we've known Fischer Marks, because he actually has a cameo toward the end of book 2, and you have to be looking very closely to see him. He's not named.
Yep.
It feels very biblical, because he's like in a tree, and Nathaniel interacts with him.
And Fischer's counting all of the people who have come out to see the Philadelphia Tea Party, or what was basically the Philadelphia Tea Party. So that's, Fischer's been around since the beginning.
Yes, almost, because he was in Boston in 1770. So, but at this point, he's made it down to Philadelphia, and then in book 3, David, when I believe when the king rejects the olive branch petition, David is like, well, go get the Watchman, because if Fischer Marks prints it, it's true. And I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure he's right.
So, but Fischer is a very respected patriotic printer. I mean, everyone believes in him, right?
David does. That's everyone to me.
Yeah.
And so we've seen him, and then obviously he's a very large character in book 4, one of the top 4 major characters in book 4, maybe 5 if we count John Hancock.
Yeah. So in that epilogue of book 3, Fischer and Patience, meets Fischer, and she meets Gilbert in the same scene, and so
to try and set up the triangle.
Sets up what's going to happen, and so Constance also meets Fischer too.
Mm-hmm.
So the very close reader will start to see some of those dynamics that are going to come up in the next book. So
I believe it's this scene. It might be a different one. I might be wrong.
I think you're right. I believe you're right. Yeah.
Where David and Fischer interact, and Fischer is wearing a red coat,
And David's like, oh, you need to dye that. And David's kind of ribbing him. He's not totally serious. And Fisher's like, oh, yeah, you definitely do. And he is not joking. And actually, that might be the housewarming. I think that's chapter 1 of book 4. I think it's David's housewarming.
Okay, I think you're right. Lots of parties, lots of conversations and gatherings.
Well, it's kind of difficult to give our characters realistic ways to interact with members of the opposite sex
if they're not walking somewhere or they're at a party, or they could be calling on them. That's more formal, you know. Like,
yeah, and you know, that might be, you know, especially for our people who are working, they can't do that. You know, they can't.
Well, and there's going to be a chaperone, so especially if we need to get our hero and heroine to be alone together, like we're pretty limited to
alone in a crowd.
Alone, but yeah, alone in a crowd or walking from one place to the next. So David is not impressed with the red coat, and neither is Fisher.
But David is teasing him. David, you know, he didn't actually intend for Fisher to dye it. However, a different fate befalls that coat, as we discover in flashbacks. Spoiler alert, he has to use it to put out a fire, and it is, you know, obviously going to be ruined. So
yeah. And Fisher's aversion to the red coat carries on, obviously not just the red coats, but literally coats that are red.
He doesn't like
into book 6. So if you read that one, you'll pick up on a little bit of that as well.
We love that. And we kind of can't think about the first red coat without thinking about this other red coat that he ends up wearing in book 6. So just briefly, it's just a short little thing, but so, and as we said so many times, we love these little things that we get, these little threads that subtly we carry through. That's one of the reasons why it's so fun writing a series. Yeah. So I don't know, like this, their love is very hard won, I think. And so you just cheer all the harder for them.
Absolutely. We love Fisher. We love Constance. They had a really hard time, but we love them, and we hope that the readers will as well when they get to know them and get to know their love story.
So yeah, thanks for reading. Definitely make sure you read their proposal story and their Christmas story.